Okay, hi and good evening, everyone. I'm continuing a bit here. We're dealing with forms in meditation. And so far, we have reviewed some more specific material about forms of meditation used for each personality vehicle, forms for the 7 rays, which are it seems to suggest geometrical in nature, and forms for healing. Now we're going to continue with mantric forms. It's a rather long section, and I probably cannot complete the whole of it right now. So it says, we must today continue the discussion on the forms that will someday be in common use among the students of occult meditation. Of course, that is, once there is or are adequate teachers of these forms. We really don't know what they are, and they will only be offered to the student when he has proved his capacity along a number of lines. We have touched upon 3 of the forms, and 5 more remain to be dealt with. So this is really quite an extensive section. Mantric forms are collections of phrases, words, and sounds, which, by virtue of rhythmic effect, achieve results that would not be possible apart from them. Okay. Notice that they may not at all be words that we recognize. Rather, they may be sounds which are effective. And they can be brought together in phrases as well as simply words. Maybe one of the most powerful of the Sanskrit mantrams is the Om Mani Padme Hum, which I think we hardly know how to use. Hail to the jewel in the lotus. And I think it eventually will produce what we call the diamond soul. These mantric forms are too numerous to study here. Suffice it to indicate somewhat the types of mantrams there will be in use, or are in use among those privileged to use them, and note special requirements make possible this privilege. Or let's say fulfilling. This study of occultism is not easy, and it is exacting, and it demands obedience to that which the teacher has given. The Tibetan gave excellent advice through letters to a number of his students, and even so, many of them did not continue to follow what he suggested. You might say that they gave up, or they did not find fulfillment immediately or within the time frame they expected. They lost their courage to continue, so that by the end of it all, maybe there were 8 students remaining who had adhered quite closely to the Tibetan's advice. There are mantric forms based entirely on the sacred word. Okay. So I just want to number these, and yeah. Well, I don't think I'm going to find the color I want, but okay. So let's just say, as I often do, firstly. Okay. And we won't be given these forms, but they will be indicated at least. Mantric forms based entirely on the sacred word, we assume that word will be the Om, O-M. These, sounded rhythmically and on certain keys, accomplish certain results, such as the invoking of protective angels. They lead to certain effects, either objective or subjective. These forms or mantrams are much more in use among Orientals and in the Eastern faiths than at present among Occidentals. As the power of sound is more completely understood and its effect studied, these mantrams will be adopted in the Occident. Oh, it's such a fascinating subject. Well, being a musician, my attention is drawn to rhythm and key. There are a number of meters, rhythms, which we observe in music, and certainly a choice in the tempered scale of some 12 different keys. So we have to understand as clearly as possible the nature of these various keys, and we can't just sound them on any key. They have to be sounded on the appropriate key, the key appropriate to the effect that they are meant to produce. Well, we in the West will gradually see these forms adopted. Right now, we are being made aware that they exist. Some of them are very old, and when enunciated in the original Sanskrit, have unbelievably powerful effects. So I think DK is protecting us from the effects that perhaps we could not handle unless we are far better educated and have gone through the necessary purification and empowerment. So powerful are they that they are not permitted to be known by the ordinary student and are only orally imparted during preparation for initiation. And it may be that during initiation, one has to utter them. Perhaps during initiation, one must utter such mantrams at the appropriate moment. Well, talk about power. The power of the word, the phrase, the sound. And I'll just make note of that. We are speaking of the power of the word, or maybe the order in which you put them, the phrase, the word, the sound. So DK Master DK is not one given to exaggeration. These word forms exist. Master Moria talks about the word of death, which cannot be released because it would lead to, I think he calls it, an impermissible fray, a battle using these kinds of powers. But still the story remains about him at a campfire with another, and from concealment, a tiger leapt at them, and he simply held up his hand. Who knows what he uttered, but the tiger fell dead on the spot. So we can understand how morally undeveloped man might use such powers until proven. Okay. There are a few very esoteric mantrams. Okay. Maybe we can talk about the, as if this were number 2. Well, we're not going to have an exact numbering here, but all right. It'll be enough to help us differentiate one from another. There are a few very esoteric mantrams that exist in the original Senza and that have remained in the knowledge of the Brotherhood from the early days of the founding of the hierarchy, 18 million years. This idea that there are words of power applies not only to the human being, but words of power are used by great beings to effect their creative purposes, to bring about effect, not affect, but effect. So this is fascinating. It's apparently an ideographic language, and the images within it sound. They radiate sound and light and color. But anyway, we're talking about mantrams millions of years old, or at least in the use of the hierarchy for millions of years, 18 million years. The lords of the flame came at that time, the solar angels earlier. They were brought by the lords of the flame when they came to earth and are only 35 in number. Now that they form the key that unlocks the mysteries of each subplane on the 5 planes of human evolution. So this is dealing with the planes of Brahma, up to and through the atmic plane, but apparently not involving the monadic and logoic plane. Now that number 35 is very important. And what can we say about it? The number 35 is most important. It is associated with the 5th ray cycles, and also with mastership, which consummates on the atmic plane. The adept receives instruction on their use and can employ them in the right place and subject to certain conditions. And when he says only 35, we can imagine the proliferation of these various kinds of mantrams. No wonder he tells us there are too many to go into at this time, nor do we need them. We're always being tested, and we have to show our worthiness to receive these and the need to do so. These powerful words of power are not given unless there is a need for them. So the right place at the right time, and every subplane has its own type of phenomena, and the word will unlock, or the mantram, whatever it may be, will unlock the ability to work on that particular subplane. They are the most powerful known on our planet, and their effects are far-reaching. Again, we are playing with fire, aren't we? And of course, the word play indicates caution. We can't really play. We have to use appropriately at the right time for the right purpose, and according to need in regard to the plan. As you know, each plane vibration responds to a different key and note, and its matter is manipulated, and its current tapped by the sounding of certain words in a specific manner and in a specific tone. When so sounded, the adept enters into the consciousness of that plane. A point of tension releases us into the consciousness of that planar area to which the point gives access. And then we can operate upon and within that plane or subplane. When so sounded, the adept enters into the consciousness of that plane and of all contained therein. So there is power over the contents of a subplane or plane. Mantrams in any tongue are founded on them, these 35, even though so far removed and unlike as to be practically useless. So these really are the secrets of initiation. And we have to know, I think, something about music and true vibration. We have to know what is a real A or a C. Those are two notes that seem to begin the scales which we most generally use, the A and the C. The orchestra tunes itself to an A, interestingly, a kind of fifth ray note, but we don't have a certainty about the exact vibration of the proper A, the A that fits into the system of vibration which is here referenced. Well, one day we will. So we have to be able to hold a note in a certain key, on a certain word or sound, or maybe sing or enunciate the whole chant, the whole phrase on that note and in that key. So this is hugely consciousness expanding and power expanding. the Sensar mantrams. I guess, all he can do is indicate. He cannot responsibly give us an example. Certain of these original mantrams are chanted in unison by the Brotherhood on great occasions, or when the united power of the lodge is required to effect desired ends. Great events are inaugurated by the sounding of their keynote with appropriate words employed. Each root race has its mantric chord. That's at least 3 notes, a chord, known to those who work with races. So again, we receive what we need according to the work assigned, and not just to know these things. It reminds one of the Wesak celebration, where we're told there are rhythmic movements and chanting by those who are assembled, members of the Brotherhood assembled. But all is created through sound. We're dealing with the manifestation of the throat center here. And these very high mantrams are vouched safe to those who are tasked with the responsibility of bringing certain phases of the plan into existence. It's quite an extraordinary idea how powerful these mantrams can be. The Sanskrit mantrams are powerful enough so that we cannot be allowed to simply access them without need and without fitness. And then we have these Senza mantrams. I imagine that Senza is an older language, maybe something spoken by the solar angels, perhaps. Well, they will have their methods of communication. So we approach with humility this whole subject. And let's see. Again, okay, so I'm going to make this, sometimes, in making an outline of what he says, there are so many particulars and subcategories that it's fairly easy to get lost. And we want to keep our mind as organized as possible. Again, there are, as you know, certain mantrams in Sanskrit that are employed by students in meditation to call the attention of some one master. These mantrams are communicated to their disciples, and by their means the master's attention is attracted and his assistance called for. Well, there are probably a number of ways of contacting the master. DK says, some of you have access to me. Some of you have it, though you know it not. And others of you could have it if you paid attention to its cultivation. We have that stage of discipleship. It's the 4th stage, I think it's called Chela on the thread. And it means that a line of communication is set up between the disciple and the master and the disciple. But that is not, I think, so scientific a method as what is being referenced here. I'm just trying to keep the outline straight if possible, you know. But of course it has to be, you know, studied carefully, and then the outline of the types and subtypes will fall into place. Other and greater formulas are sometimes imparted by which the three great lords may be contacted and their attention drawn in any specific direction. Sounds like they have to respond to the mantrams which are related to them. Now, this is this kind of mantram will not be given to the average student. It seems one of the members of the hierarchy, we have Christ, let us say, and his ashram of masters. And we have an ashram of masters connected with the Chohan, who is the Manu, and the Chohan, who is the Maha Chohan. And that seems to me to be the kind of individual who could use such mantrams connecting to the three great lords. So, if anything, you know, we have to approach this whole area of knowledge with a lot of respect and reticence. It speaks of things that we are still far from receiving. And we have much to prove yet about our nature and our usefulness before reception becomes possible. A mantram, when rightly sounded forth, creates a vacuum in matter resembling a funnel. I think this is one of the fundamental ideas of superphysics. This funnel is formed between the one who sounds it forth and the one who is reached by the sound. There is then formed a direct channel of communication. A vacuum, a funnel, is created by the mantram. That's how one gets through and is not blocked by various conditions. You will see, therefore, why it is that these forms are so carefully guarded and the words and keys concealed. Their indiscriminate use would but result in disaster. A certain point in evolution has to be reached, and a similarity of vibrations somewhat achieved before the privilege, again that word, is afforded the pupil of being custodian of a mantram whereby he may call his master. That stage of Chela on the thread, we are told, calls for very little expenditure of the master's energy when he does respond. And For the time being, I think it is for those who can reach that stage, what they will have to utilize rather than these more specific scientific forms. So carefully guarded and the words concealed, keys, words and keys concealed. Yeah. Just, read with respect. This is not going to be rushed. We have to scrupulously undergo the kind of training that makes of us a pure vessel for reception. And, as we know, the Master appreciates it when it is possible for the student to handle needs, or let's say his own needs, without calling for help. The true student seeks not to spend the time and energy of a master needlessly. When there is perhaps a real emergency, that is another matter. And when it is not proper, we are told, to attempt these higher contacts, a kind of oppression will be upon the student, informing him that it is not appropriate to seek contact when he might be able to handle it in his own way and by himself, on his own. All right. I think my numbering, is not going to be anything wonderful here, but it just, it at least gives some kind of separation between these different types of mantrams. Whoops. All right, this is where I have to do it. So we're, at least in this system of numbering, up to point number 5, but different people might number it differently. He's going through different kinds of mantrams. There are also 7 mantrams that are known to the 3 great lords and the heads of the hierarchy, whereby they can call the 7 planetary logoi, or the 7 spirits before the throne, as they are called in the Christian Bible. Now, this is really beyond the capacity of humanity per se, and of most initiates, and maybe beyond the capacity of the masters themselves, except for the 3 great lords. They can call, we're not just talking about calling the Ray Lords in, we're talking about calling the planetary logoi. So only those with a huge planetary responsibility, such as the Christ, the Manu, the Mahachohan, might be entitled to use such exalted mantrams. I suppose they connect with, I'll put it in, probably connecting with the 7 sacred planets. The seven spirits before the throne are planetary logoi. There are probably 7 solar logoi who are spirits before a still higher throne, and there are lesser beings, we can call them ray lords, who are before the throne of our planetary logos. One of these mantrams, which causes contact with the logos of our planet, it's not a sacred planet, is known to the adepts as well. Whew. I kind of takes my breath away when I think of the scope of what is being presented here, and how, along with a treatise on cosmic fire, this can give us an idea of this huge sphere of knowledge which DK is attempting to at least indicate to us, not always in detail, as a matter of fact, very often not in detail at all, because it's not safe yet. So the scale is mounted, and the words are sounded forth until we reach the mantram of our planet, which is based on the key of the earth and embodies a phrase which sums up our evolution. And that is, again, every one of these statements is to me rather awe-inspiring. We don't know the key of the earth. You can imagine how carefully guarded that key would be. I mean, one can, assume, I mean, I've heard it said, well, really we're dealing with a C sharp or something of that nature, but this is all just speculation, and certainly the phrases, words, or sounds are absolutely concealed from the likes of us and from, I guess, most masters even. What are we told? That the masters only know, is it one syllable of the name of Sanat Kumara? That understanding of the name has also to be related to the mantram, the more complete mantram of the logos of our planet. And well, we seem to be able to contact the logoi of other planets, according to what is said here, the 7 planetary logoi, or the 7 spirits before the throne. But probably the effect is lighter and not so immediately dangerous or impressive as contacting the logos of one's own planet, where more immediate effects can be expected to take place. What responsibility? Therefore, we have to understand that the control of speech is an absolute necessity and leads eventually to sufficient worthiness and cooperative involvement to be granted access to some of these higher mantrams. Of course, there are only 3 great lords, and I don't think the majority of us is ever going to be one of the 3 great lords. There's only 3. But still, there are very, very high and powerful mantrams in the Sanskrit and in the Senzar, and we have to prove our worthiness. That we're always being tested. And there really is no other way than to prove oneself. This is one of the beauties of the sign Scorpio, which is the major sign for humanity, connected as it is with the Buddhic plane, whereon the monads express themselves. The fourth creative hierarchy expresses itself there. The proving of oneself by fulfilling the requirements of the tests one inevitably encounters. Each planet has some note or phrase whereby its guides may contact their planetary logos. DK is dealing with matters so occult, so esoteric. No wonder he says that it will be a long time before humanity in general is ready for the teachings of occultism. Still, there are people that we meet and know, and we can influence them in the proper direction without overwhelming them with something they're liable to believe is a fairy tale or worse. You know, it's so easy to say, oh, all this comes from the devil, you know. But that is, if the teacher is not careful and does not speak proportionately, that kind of adverse reaction can occur. The seven logoi in turn have their available ritual or form whereby they can communicate with the threefold Lord of the solar system. This is always done 4 times a year and when urgent need arises. And I imagine we are speaking of the equinoxes and solstices. And it's a fascinating idea. The threefold Lord of the solar system, with his primordial ray, his divine ray, and his cosmic ray of will. I suppose he means the solar logos. But again, the time for such contact must be scrupulously observed. We can't imagine any haphazard contact, such as a man might engage in when offering up a prayer, you know, please let this happen, please let that happen. It has to be exactingly timed. 4 times a year, and maybe these the solstice moment is the equinoctial moment, are those times, and some of what the 3 great lords do, I think, correlate with those exact moments. We're given a lot about the full moon, but maybe not so much about the solstices and equinoxes. Now let's see what is said here. Once a year, the entire hierarchy employs a composite mantram that creates a vacuum between the highest and the lowest members of that hierarchy and on up via the 7 planetary logoi to the logos himself. Usually when the term logos is used, it does mean the solar logos, and when it means a planetary logos, we're told the logos of a planet, or, you know, planetary logos. Once a year, the entire hierarchy employs a composite mantram. What does he mean by that? That it has a number of parts that creates a vacuum between the highest and the lowest members of that hierarchy. So I suppose from the three great lords down to the humble initiate of the first degree, and on up via the 7 planetary logoi, the logoi of the sacred planet, I suppose, to the Logos himself. It marks the moment of intensest spiritual effort and vitalization during the year, and its effects last throughout the intervening months. Of course, naturally, we would ask, does this indicate the Wesak festival? Or maybe something, or the Leo Sirius festival. Really extraordinary. Such a joy to read of these expansive possibilities. Its effect is cosmic, because after all, the Solar Logos is a cosmic being and links us up with our cosmic center, and this probably, the cosmic center, probably the Pleiades, sort of the hub of the wheel around which our 7 solar systems revolve. And maybe, the zodiac too has a kind of revolution around a central, a jewel-like formation, because we're dealing in the zodiac with the heart and the head center, which does have its own jewel. Yes, my conclusion here is that we are dealing with a subject which is really inspiring. Maybe I can go on just a little bit. We're almost at the hour, and yet at the same time, a new subject is taken up in just a couple of pages. But a couple of pages can last a long time. Forms used in one of the 3 departments. So, ray mantrams. Now, let's see, we'll start with firstly again and see if that makes sense. Only we'll use a different color. Well, there's no reason to use any particular color. I'll just use this, it's quite visible. Ray mantrams. Each ray has its own formulas and sounds. We seem to have indicated that earlier. At least its own geometry that correlates, I think, with its own formulas and sounds, which have a vital effect upon the units gathered on these rays. And the effects are threefold. Okay, so ray mantrams. Each ray has its own formulas, that's plural, and sounds, not just necessarily one. And what is the effect? What is the effect? So let's take a look at that. It links him and aligns him with his higher self or ego. If I would imagine he uses the mantram associated with his soul ray. It puts him in contact with his master, and through that master with one of the great lords, depending upon the ray. So let's say one of the Chohans, and it links him with his egoic group and binds all into one composite whole vibrating to one note. Okay. So we've been taught a little about the geometry which connects us, the symbolism which connects us with our ray, and now we have phrases, words, and sounds. But these too have to be imparted. I guess they cannot be guessed at. So it links him with his higher self or ego. It puts him in touch with his master and one of the three great lords, and also the egoic group at the time that this was written. These groups were found on the higher mental plane. So maybe he means that, but then the groups moved, many of them, to the Buddhic plane, following 1925, I believe. So wherever these groups are found, again, page 39 in this book, there are three kinds of groups found on the mental plane, two on the Buddhic, one on the Atmic, and one on the monadic plane. So we're either probably talking about the higher mental plane, but maybe about Buddhic plane groups as well. Okay. This is okay, ray mantrams and their connections. With higher centers of consciousness. These mantrams are one of the secrets of the last three initiations and may not be sounded by the pupil before that time without permission, though he may participate at times in the chanting of the mantram under the master's direction. Now, what does he mean, the last three initiations? It doesn't seem to me that he's talking about the 7th, 8th, and 9th. That's too much. Is he talking about the 5th, 6th, and 7th? Well, that would make of a person a master, a Chohan, and a 7th degree Chohan. Maybe he's talking about a fivefold system of initiation where we have the 3rd, 4th, and 5th. Are we speaking of the 3rd, 4th, and 5th initiations? And if, the master's permission, it sounds like we're not dealing with 5, 6, 7. but more with 3, 4, 5, the approach to mastership, because the master is still giving direction. It's hard to know what he means by the last 3 initiations, because maybe initiations 6 and 7 are not normally considered in that way. Okay. Mantrams, or formulas of words sung by the pupil, which have direct effect on one of the 3 bodies. Okay. Well, I think I should have put, this should have been not firstly, but maybe, I'll forget the LY, just 6th. The Ray mantrams. Okay. Because he does seem to simply be continuing with different kinds of mantrams. Oh, let's see what the problem is here. All right. And now, sung mantrams. Is there a difference between chanting and singing? Well, one day we will know. They are sung by the pupil and have a direct effect upon one of his 3 bodies. Well, we've already dealt with forms of meditation that have a direct effect on one of the 3 bodies. And maybe, I think he said, they'll be among the first to be given out, because they are very practical, and they still need guarding, no question about it. Okay. Mantrams are formulas of words sung by the pupil. I think he uses that word deliberately rather than chanted, which have direct effect on one of the 3 bodies, and naturally the key and note must be known. Okay, these mantrams are largely already in use, though in a much distorted degree, in the services of the religious bodies in all lands. Some light on them is being communicated in the ritual of the church, and there's obviously here an hiatus where he's elaborated on something more specific. The passwords, as used in Masonry, though practically valueless now, based on the use of mantrams, and someday, when there is an initiate head to all these organizations, such as Masonry, various esoteric societies, and religious bodies, and those are the 3 organisms, the old mantrams will be given back in pure form to the peoples. So I imagine, a word like Amen in the church, or so mote it be in Masonry, these are perhaps what he's indicating. And there are other passwords to be used as one moves from one degree to another, etc. But though they are in use in maybe quite an unrecognizable form, a distorted form. There's been so much crystallization in both the church and Masonry. he does tell us that there are three bodies or organisms which are attempting to reach humanity with the ageless wisdom: Masonry on the first ray, the Church on the second ray, and the banded esoteric organisms on the third ray. I consider maybe those rays to be monadic in nature. Now, what else? Come on. I think we have one more. Yeah. Okay. There are also mantrams for use in healing. And this would be now, in the same way we had forms of meditation for healing. They are more imagined. And these are enunciated. Different centers are in use. More the ajna center in the earlier type, where one visualizes. And here the throat center, maybe in combination with some other chakras. There are also mantrams for use in healing and for the development of certain psychic faculties. Maybe Leadbeater, I think he was educated by Master K.H. In the building up of his psychic faculties. Maybe these mantrams, some of them were given to him or to Annie Besant as they did their research. Some mantrams have a direct effect on the centers of the body and will later be used under the guidance of the master for increasing vibration, for causing fourth dimensional movement, and for the complete vivification of a center. I think if we did not have an idea of how powerful the word can be, the phrase, the word, the sound, we have a much clearer idea now. So, psychic faculties, healing, and these Master DK would use, he is a great healer. You can't say he's the great healer, but he's going to be one of those teaching the ancient methods of esoteric healing, probably very much in an externalized condition. Okay. Still other mantrams act upon the hidden fire, but I will deal with them a little later. I mean, these must be mantrams for arousing the Kundalini, and again must be very safely guarded, as tampering with the fires, playing with the fires, it seems to be a favorite activity of overeager students. The hidden fire, but with them I shall deal later. There are numerous Oriental books on the subject, which is so vast a one that I caution the student from investigating much. Okay. The whole question of occult development is one in which the greatest caution has to be observed, and a real obedience, a real humility, a real tendency towards service, unselfishness, unselfish service. When we begin to see the power of these mantrams and of these forms of meditation, we understand why so much caution is required. It would but prove for the worker in the world a waste of time if he really wants to work and do something, otherwise you just get lost in study. I have touched upon the matter because no book on meditation would be complete without a reference to what will someday supersede all preliminary meditation when the race has reached a certain point of development and when the higher mind holds greater sway. These occult mantrams, rightly imparted and rightly enunciated, will be part of the ordinary curriculum of the student. He will start with his meditation by the use of his Ray mantram. He will start his meditation by the use of his Ray mantram, thereby adjusting his position in the scheme, and he will follow with the mantram that calls his master and which puts him en rapport with the hierarchy. Then he will begin to meditate upon his bodies, with his bodies adjusted, and with a vacuum formed that may then be used as the medium of communication. So the 1, 2, 3, the method is laid out for us. The ordinary curriculum, probably given out in the esoteric schools when they are directed behind the scenes, perhaps mostly by a master. So there will be, at first, in this 1, 2, 3, okay, we are being given a 1, 2, 3 process. He will start his meditation with the use of his Ray mantram. Thereby adjusting his position in the scheme. He will follow this with the mantram that calls his master, which puts him in touch with the hierarchy, en rapport with the hierarchy. And then he will begin to meditate with his bodies adjusted and the vacuum formed. As a medium of communication. Will you not agree with me that this book must be read more often and more carefully than is presently the case? Well, friends, that's enough for tonight, I think. We continue with these forms in meditation. We've been looking at mantric forms largely. And we are on page 166. So I have brought down the indicators, what page and what date, and we finished program number 37, I believe. I often get these mixed up, and then I rely upon the communications team to help me out. And we'll, on whatever day, but not tonight, begin program 38 on page 166, and we'll be working with forms used in one of the 3 departments. There are a few of these types of analysis of forms that remain. So much information. I'm so, what can I say, re-excited about this book. It's been years since I've examined it closely. Of course, I've examined references from these books, this particular book, but not to see it in its continuity, and what a gift it is as a foundational text, along with Initiation, Human and Solar. I think we have to have a deep appreciation for how the Tibetan has oriented us toward real esoteric accomplishment for the sake of enhancing our service to humanity. So many blessings, a lot of love, many blessings to everybody, and we will continue. Are we halfway through the book? Well, not quite, almost, almost halfway through the book. And there are some tantalizing prospects that lie ahead. And as he said to one of his more advanced students, he said, well, there are so many words of so many books that you've read that are stored in your causal body. So how about doing something with all that? And we too, with the knowledge we accumulate, we have to do something, at least to inform others of the treasure, those who can appreciate what the treasure is. So we'll see you soon, and I'll send this out to you, or actually BL will put it onto the Moria Federation website, and Harold will put it onto the YouTube. And hopefully we will continue. That's our big job, to assimilate before the great conclave. So bye for now.